Good morning, I'm Don Burgess, your host for Bermuda's News and Views, and my guest today is the Premier of Bermuda, David Burt. Good afternoon, or good morning.
Good morning, Don. It's a pleasure to be here with Burt News, and good morning to your listening audience, I'm sure watching from around the world.
2 years ago today, the PLP rode a tidal wave. I guess it's the only way that you can describe it, because I remember that night just looking at the early returns and how it was going to be a clear-cut victory. Any reflections back on that evening?
Well, on that evening, we pledged. I remember at the end of the speech that we said that we will get to work the next day. And the reflections are, 2 years later, that it's been an incredible amount of hard work by not only our cabinet team, but also our wider caucus team, and also by able persons of the civil service to deliver on many of the initiatives that we've managed to deliver on, making sure that we keep our promises to the electorate, which they voted for us on that particular day.
What would you say you may have more than this, or more that you want to reflect on, but we're just limited to three. What would you say the three biggest successes you've had in the first 2 years?
From the successes, I think, number one, and this is key and critical, it's expanding opportunity to higher education. For that has been something that has been absolutely critical for us. Right now in Bermuda, there is no one who wants to upgrade their skills, wants to get either a associate's degree or even move on to bachelor's degree, a certification at the Bermuda College, and is prevented from doing that because of their financial position. And that is huge. And so from that perspective, it's something that we said we wanted to do, and it's something that we focus on. The next thing, which I would say, is dealing with some of the social challenges of which we face. So whether or not that's from the sex offenders legislation which we put in, the roadside sobriety legislation which we put in, the fact of more funding towards tackling the root causes of crime when we're dealing with tackling economic opportunity, but also tackling items such as Redemption Farm and others where we're getting young people who may be on a different path engaged in what they're doing. I think that that's critically important. And I think my third success, which I think is something that that I'm proud of, is that we're laying the base for economic transformation. And when I say laying the base for economic transformation, laying the base for where we can begin to see a more fair economy with reduced health insurance costs, with reduced energy costs, while also taking into account that we've reduced taxes on workers while making sure that the tax burden is more fairly spread by introducing, for instance, the dividends tax for local companies. And the one example I can say, as I was Minister of Finance, you're certainly not allowed to disclose particular companies, but we introduced a dividend tax. And it was actually at the recommendation of the accounting firms locally on the island, because they have an idea of the size and scope of what is happening inside the local economy, which was not subject to taxation. And there were some particular retail companies in Bermuda who were declaring $1 million quarterly dividends to their limited internal family shareholders. Now, that money was completely tax-free. Now that money is actually subject to taxation. So at the same point in time that we introduced that tax, we also cut payroll taxes for those persons making $96,000 or less a year. And I think that that's an example of economic fairness.
Right, just so everyone's on not really a level playing field, but at least more equitable.
Well, you have to. I mean, Bermuda, you have to remember, 2 years ago, we were elected on the premise of building a better and fairer Bermuda. And in Bermuda, it is not fair that the wealthiest individuals in the country earn money that is not subject to taxation, whereas the workers of this country, people who are working everyday jobs who do not have access to inherited wealth, are paying taxes on every dollar which they earn. That cannot be fair. And that was the perspective of which, when we spoke to the accounting firms in our first budget, and they had said that this is a recommendation which we may want to pursue, we went ahead down that road. We put it at exemption. So the first $10,000 is exempt, so it doesn't touch small business owners. But on top of that, it was. And I think that that is an example of how you can deliver fair tax policy to make our economy more fair and to garner the resources for the cumulative $13 million of additional funding of which we put into education and training over the last 2 years. That's the way that you get the resources to bring the budget into balance, and those are the things which are important.
Just to touch back on the redemption farm, I was in court on Monday. There was a 19-year-old man who was begging Magistrate Juan Wolf to send him to prison because he didn't have enough money to pay his fine, which is only something like $1,000. And I mean, literally, he was in tears. Just send me to jail for 80 days. And Pastor Leroy Bean was in there, and he stood up and said, you know, we've got a spot at Redemption Farm for him to help teach the young man some skills because he didn't get a GED or graduate from high school. He had no job prospects. I will assume this is like the type of person you want to try to help out and give him a
Absolutely.
chance.
And all that young man and the other 7 young men who were in the first round of Redemption Farms came to the cabinet office on Tuesday during the cabinet meeting and met the entire cabinet. And of course, it was an emotional scene. And it's emotional because this is the work of which the government has to go through in order to change lives. And one of the things of which I say is that we did not get to where we were overnight, or where we are, and we're not going to get out of it overnight. But it's the interventions at that level which are going to help us for the future. And as I said to those young men that day, you may fall back at some points in time. Not every day you're going to succeed, but what's important is that each day is better than your last, and you continue to work and improve yourself. The government will continue to support young men and women who want to turn their life around. We were going to provide them with opportunities to go ahead and to make a success. And at that point in time, I said that this was one of the fulfillment of one of our platform initiatives. Not only did we say that we're going to tackle the root cause of gang violence, but we also said that we were going to form social enterprises from models overseas which have worked in reduction of gang violence. And the easiest way to put it is that we do not grow vegetables. We do not employ people to grow vegetables. We grow vegetables to employ people. And that is the way and the mantra which Redemption Farms would proceed. And I think that it's a brilliant thing that we made sure that there was funding in this year's budget to do.
And I don't know if the viewers can see, but I can see, like in your body language and your tone, that how much it touched you to.
Oh, absolutely. There's sometimes people, it's no surprise, I get a little bit emotional in this job sometimes. And the times when you really get emotional is when, I would say, you have young people whose lives are changed because of the different policy changes which you had. When you have young people who tell you, or mature students who tell you that they would not have been employed had they not have had the opportunity to go back to school to upgrade their skills and to learn something, that's important. And I think from that perspective, that's why we do what we do.
Now, I know it hasn't always been all flowers and chocolate for the last couple of years.
Absolutely not. Slings and arrows as well.
Yeah. What would you say is your biggest disappointment in the first 2 years that you haven't been able to accomplish, or things didn't work out the way that you wanted?
I think that my biggest disappointment would be certainly banking diversification in the country. I think that, and I'm not trying to criticize the banks, but the facts are that some of the challenges of which we've had with banking, whether it's the increasing interest rates, which have certainly taken money out of consumers' pockets, which has had an impact, I would say, on the broader economy when it comes to retail sales and other things. And also when it's the challenging of new businesses that may be coming into the island. From that perspective, I'm challenged by that. And so if I would say the biggest disappointment at which I'd have, it would certainly be along that line.
If you could do things differently, what would you do differently to make that happen?
Well, I think that you learn as you go along, and I think doing it differently is that I don't think that I would have done it differently. What we did, and when I was Minister of Finance, was give the banks an opportunity to change. Lay out, it doesn't make sense going in and saying that we're not going to work with the established partners that are there. We're just going to go ahead and do it a different way. I don't think that makes sense. I think it's important to learn and to have that engagement and that dialogue. They have their own restrictions. They have their own responsibilities. We have our own too. And I think that from the perspective of banks as they are, I think that we need more banking competition. There are companies or countries in other regions that are considered our competitors who have far lower mortgage rates than we do. And that is something that is crippling Bermudian families. And if you can imagine what a 1% mortgage reduction rate would do to so many Bermudian families, it would be money in their pockets. And that's the reason why we said that we're going to introduce a mortgage guarantee program. The opposition criticized it, but we firmly believe that what is most needed is relief from some of the cost of living drivers that are here. When the Bank of Butterfield is reporting record profits while shedding jobs, at the same point in time people are struggling to pay their mortgages, that can't be a recipe for sustainable economic success. And that's why we are going to press on with that mission of a mortgage guarantee program to provide mortgage relief to public sector workers, but also employees in the private sector.
But like with anything, I know the bank had the huge profits the last year or so, but with technology creates job displacement. I mean,
Absolutely.
rather than people go to the ATM rather than see a teller, or they do online banking.
That's fine. But the question is, where then do those efficiencies go? And if those efficiencies then go to your bottom line, which is fine, but the people in the country are struggling and their retail sales are falling, and that means that the retailers who you're banking are also challenged because you're just taking more of that money that you are earning, and as opposed to returning it back to the people, you are taking it to your profits. That's fine. But we need competition. I'm not in the business of telling Butterfield what to do, or any other bank for that matter, of what to do with their monies and their staff. That's not my place. It is, however, my place to use this office to say what we expect good corporate citizens to be. And where individuals, we do not believe in the private sector acting in the best interest of the community as a whole, the government has the ability to make legislation or to change rules to make the landscape more competitive and to allow persons or to use the influence of the government to provide programs that will reduce mortgage rates, which reduce the cost of housing and reduce the cost of living. That's important.
Well, and I know, like, from my own personal experience, my wife and I, we just finally paid off our mortgage this year.
Oh, congratulations.
But like, instead
I
of
wasn't invited to the mortgage burning party, Don.
we haven't had one.
Thank you.
But I know, like, not having that money available now makes us, now we can start doing improvements on the house, so the money's being spent elsewhere in the economy. When you talk about banks, because before I think you mentioned looking at banks coming in, plural. So are you in discussions with overseas entities?
Absolutely, and those discussions continue. I think I was actually meeting with the Minister of Finance earlier today. I know that the Bermuda Monetary Authority has had approaches from two banks which are looking to set up in the country under our revised regime, and so it remains to be seen. But setting up a bank is not an easy process. It's not something that is done in a month. It's something that takes time to ensure that it is safe, to ensure that customers and consumers cannot be put at risk. So that will be an ongoing process. But you asked for my disappointment. My disappointment is that we don't have more diversity in the banking sector. But I do know and have confidence that the Minister of Finance is working diligently on that particular issue, and I know that there will be fruits that will come. I hate to give cricket analogies, but it's been my favorite statement of the last week that I've been telling persons who I'm speaking to, is stick to the wickets and the runs will come. And the government is now beginning to see some of the runs come.
So are there any special requirements that are going to be required for these new banks, such as they're going to have to take FinTech money, or they're going to have to take casino money?
No, there's not going to be any requirements, but we want our banks that will not have the restrictions that are imposed upon our existing banks.
Which is casino money and...
No, that's not a restriction particularly for them. What I'm saying is, because of their existing correspondent banking partners and because of their existing relationships, they may be more challenged in expecting things, whether it's casino gaming, whether it's FinTech, whether it's other items inside the economy. And if you have persons that may have new and different banking partners and don't have existing portfolios which you're dealing with, or if you're talking about other banks moving to the country who already have an existing portfolio and are used to dealing in these areas of business and have the AML regulations and all those items that are in place already, then that just makes it an easier bit of work.
You talked about the economy. The labor force survey came out last week. It was a mixture of good and bad news, I would say, because there were more people employed, but people on average were earning less. And the retirement numbers were way up from when you guys, when the PLP took office. I think if I looked at my figure here, the retirement figure from May 2016, number of people retired was 15.5%. Now it's up to 18.3% of the population. You know, how is the aging population sort of a ticking time bomb for Bermuda?
I don't want to call it a ticking time bomb. What I have to say is that you have to manage it correctly. And the way that you manage it correctly is do things that people have been talking about for years, which haven't been done. Tomorrow, we will increase the retirement age, the mandatory retirement age, the public service from 65 to 68. We've been talking about this for a long time.
Well, last year when I had this interview with you, you brought it up.
Well, no, but now we're actually doing it. The legislation has been tabled. It has been done. It will be passed tomorrow. And so what we are talking about is that's how you address the issues. You have to say that we're in a different circumstance. And if people are living longer, then you have to allow people to work longer. And that helps your pensions because people pay into pensions longer. They collect less from it. Those are the changes of which you have to make. And those are the changes of which the government is committed to making.
Along, I guess, with the same thing was the declining birth rate, which is putting pressure on the schools. You know, we've had a situation where Elliott, we have, I forget which one of the schools, but they're only having one P4 class this year instead of two, which of course caused consternation amongst the community there. And, you know, Tatum is closed for health reasons. But like all the students there have been accommodated in the other schools without any problem. You know, is it going to come to a point where the government's going to have to step in and say, we're going to have to close some schools just because there's not enough students anymore?
I think that what you've seen is that there's certainly a decline in the amount of persons who are, there's certainly a decline in the amount of persons who are in school, the amount of children that are in school. And so from the perspective of, from that perspective, with the decline of the persons that are in school and of school age, we clearly need to look at the entire system. But that's the reason why we were committed to reviewing the entire education system. There's been a lot of work in progress which has been made by the Board of Education and by the Board of Education and others in designing what the new school system will look like. We did say that we're going to phase out middle schools, and we are going to get to the point in time where we're going to phase out middle schools, and that means that school transformation is going to happen. My focus is not on closing schools, my focus is on building new schools. And I happen to believe that before my term is up, that there will be the building, or at least the beginning to the construction of new schools.
Can you say which age?
I can't. I would love to say that. What I'm saying is that the minister and the Department of Education have put together a comprehensive plan. And that plan, we came to the cabinet saw some things that we liked, some things that we didn't like. We sent them back because we can't just focus on buildings. We have to focus on accountability in schools, what that will look like. They came back to the cabinet this week, Tuesday, on some things. We went back and said there's a few more things which are needed. That plan will most likely be released to the public shortly. And then we can have a discussion on what the future of the school system will look like.
I guess part of the thing too is like if you're building a new school, you're making it 21st century ready, which I mean, it's all fine to say we're going to have internet and laptop technology, but the school has to be
absolutely
built for that.
Yes. So. And that's the thing. Remember, we have primary schools in Bermuda that were built in the 1800s. Let's be real here. The fact is that the technology is going to have a fundamental impact on the delivery of education going forward. And Bermuda can either continue to go with policies of which we've had previously or actually have a radical transformation so that we have better outcomes. That's what we were elected to do. We were elected to make sure that public education works in this country. The Minister of Education has his daughter in a public school. The Junior Minister of Education has his children in the public school system. The Premier of the country will have his child in the public education school system, and we will make the system work. We are committed to it, and there is no level of commitment or no shortage of the commitment of which we've had. Again, Don, over the 2 years we've been in office, a cumulative increase of $13 million towards education. It has been our focus, and we are making sure the resources are placed there.
You mentioned earlier about the economy and the retail sales index, and every month we look and we see the retail sales index has gone down again. Even if we wanted to account in for all the overseas purchases through one of the four avenues, it would add it in, it would still be down. What's a way to help stimulate the economy? Because everyone can say things are working, but the average retailer is looking at their bottom line and they're seeing less money in the till.
Some retailers are seeing less money, some retailers are seeing more money. Overall, aggregate retail sales have been decreasing. But as I have stated, when I stated in Parliament very clearly, is that when you have an increasing mortgage rate environment, this is what you will get. People have less disposable income. When there are families that are getting letters from their banks which are saying that their mortgage payment is going to go up by $800 the next month, they have to find that money. And that money is going to come from money that they would spend otherwise. That's the facts. And that's why we have to address it from a holistic place. And the holistic place for addressing that is dealing with the high rates of interest which are being charged inside of our community, which have knock-on effects in many other places, such as energy costs and food costs.
You've addressed a little bit about food costs when you put the sugar tax in, although a lot of people have complained about the high prices that, but a lot of them aren't seeing what they feel like the reductions like were supposed to happen with the vegetables and other products.
No, here's what I would say. I would say that no, they have not, and that is the reason why we have dedicated 10% of the sugar tax money to the Bermuda Economic Development Corporation. The one thing we have to remember is the full sugar tax only went into effect on April 1st this year. So 10% of that money is going to the Bermuda Economic Development Corporation to assist with startups with vertical farming here, which we expect will make the cost of healthy foods less expensive in Bermuda. We have to make sure that we divert that money to deal with some of the provisions. One of the things that I've said, I think I gave an interview a few days ago in where I was asked the same question about the sugar tax, and it's one of the lessons of which I've learned in being in this office, and that is that you can't actually rush everything. And so with the sugar tax, unfortunately, the only instrument of which we had to implement it was through the customs duty regime, and not because of how we implemented it, it's because of how the Bermuda economy is set up and structured, that companies may account for things in buckets. So they may just have a beverage bucket, not just, a water bucket, a soda bucket, a this bucket, a that bucket. And so the way in which they account for it is that they just increase the price of everything. That was not the way that it was intended. That was not the impact of which it was expected to have. I have said that we are going to review the sugar tax, not because we disagree with the policy. The policy aim is a correct one. The decreased consumption of sugar is good for the economy and good for our healthcare costs in the long term, but ensuring that only the things that are supposed to be actually impacted by it are being impacted. And so we're going to review the powers of the Consumer Protection Division in Home Affairs to ensure that we can enforce those.
In one way, though, because the goal of having people eat more vegetables and healthy foods is a great one.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, if we're giving the discounts to overseas things that are being brought in, the price disparity between the Bermuda product and the overseas product becomes greater. So, as a couple examples, local strawberries were $12.99 and the Driscoll were $6.99. So somebody who's on low income is not going to be buying the local product. And same thing, eggs. The Windy Bank farm eggs were $4.65 or $5, and the overseas eggs were just a little bit over $2 a carton. So, in one way, it's good to get people to eat healthy, but then we're hurting the local farmer in a sense.
But I don't look at it as a zero-sum game. I look at that as an opportunity to assist with investments to make local farming production more efficient. And that's why you talk about vertical farms. You have to talk about investments in technology and ways to do things better here in the Bermuda economy. So I have faith that we can actually do that.
FinTech was always one of your big push items.
I would say economic diversification as a whole.
Okay. What would you say have been successes in that area?
Successes have been coming. We now I just actually had a FinTech meeting. We now have 18 jobs in Bermuda in FinTech, whereas they were 0 2 years ago when we took office. So 18 is more than 0, and that's a great accomplishment. We'll be making an announcement on Monday, a major announcement on Monday regarding FinTech and another company that will be setting up in Bermuda, which we've been working on for quite some time. And so we're seeing certainly progress that's there. I think that Facebook's Libra has helped to shine a light on what the future of the economy, the global economy, will look like. And Bermuda wants to play a part in that future global economy. And I think that we are well positioned to do that. We want to be a leader in financial services. So whether or not that's FinTech, which we've seen growth in, or whether or not that's insurance, in where the long-term sector of insurance we've seen growth, or whether or not that's in asset management, where there is still some growth that is happening. I had a meeting with a company that recently set up in Bermuda. They've now staffed up to 10. They're looking to continue to expand. And they offered a position for 2 Bermudian students to train with them. So there is progress that's being made in the economy. But we have to remember, the economy is always changing.
Yes.
It's always changing. And I remind people that, and it's something that some people don't remember, but I do remind them that Trimmingham's went out of business in an economic boom. Companies go out of business in boom and bust. It's not a reflection of the overall economy all the time. It's also a reflection of individual companies and decisions which they make. At the same points in time, companies close, companies start up. They close for many reasons, and they open for many reasons. And what the government has to continue to do is to support an efficient economy functioning. And I think that's what we've done by providing direct lending from the BEDC to small startups so they can get on their feet a lot quicker than they were able to do before.
Do you think there are lessons to be learned from arbitrate?
I would say that arbitrate is an interesting case, and it's an interesting case because there's much noise about arbitrate, but arbitrate was never issued a license in Bermuda to conduct digital asset business activity. So there's never been any conduct of digital asset business activity licensed under the Bermuda Monetary Authority or from our shores. The only approval of which was given was the approval to purchase a building. And purchasing a building yields tax revenue to the government of Bermuda, which the Minister of Finance at the time, myself, viewed as a benefit to the country. So from that particular perspective, now the funny thing is that the tax revenue wasn't as great as it should have been, and that's something else that the current Minister of Finance is addressing in a change to tax laws in general, because there's lots of loopholes which are hidden inside of our tax laws. But I say that on an overall basis is that that companies. A lot of companies wanted to come to Bermuda and to talk about FinTech. The change of the lesson that's learned is that you rarely see us now talking about companies until after their license. And I think that's the change, that's the impact. From that perspective, we don't ever support and or endorse companies, but we meet with companies all the time. And my social media, I always post with the companies I meet with. We meet with companies on a regular basis, and anyone who looks at my Twitter account will show that I discuss the people of whom we meet with all the time. But the approach that we've taken now is that we've also taken an approach on focusing on the very large players in the global sector to try to get them here. So it's been a kind of adjustment in the FinTech approach, focusing on the blue chip companies that we know have established track records that we know can get past the Bermuda Monetary Authority and set up quickly.
Just to finish up, what do you hope to accomplish in the next 3 years? What would be, if you had a signature thing that you want to get done between now and whenever you decide to call the next election? What would that be?
Certainly education reform, which is the phasing out of middle schools, the introduction of our national health plan, and making sure that we pool insurance risk across the entire country to reduce health insurance costs. And the third thing, of course, are measures to tackle the cost of living. We know that we have an ability to be a leader in green energy, and we want our leadership in green energy to lead to reduced energy costs for citizens, reduce energy costs, reduce mortgage rates, and also reduce mortgage costs, reduce reduced energy rates can lead to lower food prices because that's less expenses for companies that sell food, and also putting that additional investment. So those are the main things. The final thing which I hope to accomplish is that we're going to have some buildings in the city of Hamilton that are going to be taller than the cathedral.
Wow, taller than the cathedral. You can't just leave me off right there.
Our platform said that we're going to relax height restrictions in the city of Hamilton. Our throne speeches have said that. Our budget statements have said that. We intend to reduce those height restrictions, and we have to do. I am a big believer that the only way that Bermuda can advance into the future is if we stop doing things the way that which we've always done them. If we want to reduce the cost of housing inside this country, we have to have more people living and working in high-rise cities in Hamilton. And so, from that perspective, that's where the focus will. That's where some of the cost of living or housing reduction focuses will be. And that's why a lot of our young people don't come home. No one wants to be living overseas independently and then come back home and live in your parents' house. And so we have to recognize that we have to do things differently. And we cannot continue to do things the way we've done them for the last 50 years and expect different results in Bermuda.
Mr. Premier, I thank you for your time today. As
That
always.
30 minutes went very quickly.
Yes, it does. It always does. It always does. All right. I'm your host, Don Burgess. We're here for Bernie's News and Views, and we're very happy to have the Premier with us again. I think it's third or fourth time.
No problem.
Last year. And I'm wearing my St. George's colors. Somerset. Oh, I just lost my St. George's pin. Everyone's laughing at me.
As am I.
Anyway, as always, hope you have a beautiful afternoon and enjoy the rest of your day.